I never wanted to be a prison guard. The heavy uniform, the constant vigilance, the way my hand kept brushing against the baton at my hip like it was some kind of security blanket. But here I was, first day at Tulsa Women's Correctional Facility, my boots clicking down sterile hallways that smelled of industrial cleaner and desperation. "Howard! Keep up," barked Sergeant Miller, a stocky woman with arms like tree trunks. "Orientation's over. Time to see what you're made of." My heart hammered against my ribs. 4 years in the police academy hadn't prepared me for this, the way the women watched from their cells, eyes tracking my every movement, assessing my weaknesses like predators. "Block C needs a surprise inspection." "You're coming with me," Miller announced, not bothering to check if I followed. The cell block was a cacophony of voices that died to whispers as we entered. I kept my face neutral, the way they taught us. Show nothing. Fear. Sympathy. Anything could be weaponized against you here. "Cell 307, Miller pointed. "Start there. Look for contraband. Don't let them talk you into anything." I stepped toward the cell, keys jangling at my belt. 2 women inside, one middle-aged with fading blonde hair, the other younger with coal-black hair pulled into a severe ponytail. The dark-haired one looked up, green eyes hitting mine like physical contact. "Well, well," she drawled, unfolding from her bunk with feline grace. "Fresh meat in a pressed uniform." "Stand for inspection," I ordered, my voice steadier than I felt. She smiled, not the submissive compliance I expected, but something knowing. Something that made my skin prickle with awareness. "Yes, officer." "Howard," I supplied, immediately regretting giving her my name. "Officer Howard," she savored each syllable. "I'm Emerson Young, remember that. You'll be writing it in your reports soon enough." I searched methodically, hyper-aware of her eyes on me, while her cellmates stared at the ceiling. Nothing in the bedding, nothing taped beneath the sink. "Looking for this?" Emerson said, reaching beneath her mattress. My hand flew to my baton, but she withdrew only a small book of poetry. "Just words, officer. The most dangerous contraband of all." Later, in the staff break room, a male guard named Zachary slid a coffee toward me. "Saw you got young for your first inspection. Bad luck." She seemed... I searched for the right word. "Charismatic?" "Yeah, that's her game. She's in for sophisticated fraud, talked investors out of millions. Woman can convince you black is white if you listen long enough." I sipped my coffee, remembering those green eyes. "Thanks for the warning." "No joke, Howard. Emerson Young is the type who'll make you question everything you know about yourself. Keep your distance," he tapped his temple meaningfully, "or you'll end up compromised faster than you can say professional misconduct." That night, I couldn't sleep. My apartment felt too quiet after the constant noise of the prison. I kept seeing those eyes, hearing that voice. Something about her had gotten under my skin in a way I couldn't explain. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of cell doors and green eyes watching me through bars. Only in the dream, I couldn't tell which side of those bars I stood on. 2 weeks into my new job, and Emerson Young had already earned me a reputation. The other guards noticed how she'd straighten up when I walked by, how she'd hold my gaze a beat too long, how she seemed to accidentally brush against me during count. "You need to write her up," Zachary insisted during lunch break. "She's testing you." He was right. Yesterday, I'd ordered Emerson to move away from a restricted area, and she'd smiled, taking a slow, deliberate step toward me instead. "What are you going to do about it, Officer Howard?" she'd asked, voice low enough that no one else could hear. I'd frozen, caught between protocol and something else I couldn't name, something that made my pulse quicken when she was near. "Next time," I told Zachary now, stabbing at my salad, "I won't hesitate." That afternoon, Warden Stevens called a staff meeting to announce new rehabilitation programming. "The board has approved funding for additional recreational therapy," she explained, a tall woman with salt and pepper hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Starting next week, we'll implement art therapy, creative writing, and yoga classes. Each requires officer supervision." I nearly choked when she assigned me to yoga. Of course. The universe had a sick sense of humor. The first class was held in what used to be the prison chapel. Mats were arranged in rows, the instructor a willowy blonde from the community positioned at the front. I stood by the door, scanning the 15 inmates who'd signed up, my stomach dropping when Emerson entered last, dressed in regulation gray sweats. She nodded at me, almost respectful, before taking a mat in the back row. I allowed myself to relax slightly. Maybe this would be uneventful after all. For 30 minutes I maintained my professional demeanor, eyes sweeping the room for any signs of trouble. Then the instructor announced the final pose. "Warrior 2, she called. "Feel your strength, ladies. Embody it." My attention drifted to Emerson. In one fluid motion she extended her arms, her body forming a perfect line. Where the other inmates wobbled or grimaced with effort, she seemed transformed, serene, powerful, beautiful. I couldn't look away. As if feeling my gaze, she opened her eyes, meeting mine across the room. The air between us seemed to vibrate with something unspoken. Someone coughed, breaking the moment. I snapped my attention back to the door, heart pounding against my ribs like it was trying to escape. After class, as inmates filed out, Emerson lingered, rolling her mat with deliberate slowness. "Didn't know prison guards took an interest in yoga," she said. "I don't," I replied too quickly. "I'm just doing my job." Her smile was knowing. "You should try it sometime. Helps with tension." She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the generic soap all inmates used, somehow different on her. "You carry a lot of tension, Officer Howard. Right here." She lifted her hand as if to touch my shoulder, stopping just short when I flinched. "That's enough," I said, my voice shakier than I intended. Later that night, doing rounds on the midnight shift, I paused outside her cell. Emerson was awake, sitting cross-legged on her bunk, reading by the dim overnight lighting. "Can't sleep?" she asked without looking up. I should have kept walking. Instead, I heard myself ask, "What are you reading?" "Sappho," she replied, showing me the cover. "Poetry from ancient Greece. Beautiful stuff about love and longing." "Where did you get that?" "It wasn't in your approved materials list." "Library cart. Want me to read you some?" Her green eyes glinted in the half-light. "No," I said, but didn't move. She recited anyway, voice soft but clear. "Someone, I tell you, will remember us, even in another time." I walked away, her words following me down the corridor. That night I dreamed of ancient Greece, of women in flowing garments, of green-eyed poets whose words could reach across centuries and still make hearts tremble. In the morning, I requested a different assignment. Warden Stevens denied it with a single line: "Staff shortages." Request declined. Night shifts were the worst. Just me, the occasional patrol officer, and hundreds of women behind locked doors with nothing but their thoughts. This particular Tuesday, the facility hummed with that strange energy that sometimes builds before a storm. I'd been a guard long enough now, 3 months, to recognize the warning signs. I found myself outside cell 307 again. Emerson's cellmate had been moved to medical for her diabetes treatment, leaving her alone for the night. She sat on her bunk, arms wrapped around her knees, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Everything all right in there?" I asked, telling myself it was standard procedure to check on isolated inmates. Emerson looked up, surprised to see me. No smirk tonight, no carefully constructed armor. Just vulnerability I hadn't witnessed before. "Today's the anniversary," she said, voice rough. 2 years since I was convicted." I should have nodded and moved on. Instead, I lingered, keys jangling as I shifted my weight. "Want to talk about it?" The words escaped before I could stop them. She studied me for a long moment. "Why would you care?" "Because..." I searched for a professional justification, found none. "Because sometimes I think there's more to your story." "There always is," she replied, then sighed. "Warden's probably watching on cameras. You'd better go." "Cameras in this section are down for maintenance until morning," I said, surprising myself again. "Nobody's watching." Something shifted in her expression. She moved to the bars. "I never committed fraud," she said quietly. "My ex-boyfriend, Michael, did. Used my company, my reputation, to swindle those people. When it all fell apart, he made sure the evidence pointed to me. Why didn't you fight it?" "I did. But Michael was connected. Old money, friends in high places. His father's golf buddies with the DA." Her laugh was bitter. "My public defender advised me to take a plea deal. Said I'd get 20 years if I didn't." I remembered her case now. It had made regional news. Young financial services collapses, owner imprisoned for investor fraud. The papers had painted her as calculating, cold. The woman before me seemed anything but. "Do you always work nights?" she asked, changing the subject. "Just this month. Covering for someone." She nodded. Night's the hardest. Too quiet. Makes you think about all the mistakes that led you here. Something in her words resonated. Before I could stop myself, I said, I know what you mean. Officer Howard has regrets? A hint of her usual teasing returned. Do tell. I should have walked away. Instead, I leaned against the wall opposite her cell. I was married, I found myself saying, for 8 years, to a man who looked perfect on paper. Doctor, nice house, wanted kids, the whole package. What happened? I happened. Or rather, who I really am happened. I stared at the floor. One day I realized I'd built my entire life around what everyone else wanted. Parents, husband, society. Never stopped to ask myself what I wanted. And what did you want? I met her eyes, not him. Understanding passed between us, unspoken but clear. That's why you became a prison guard? Reinvention? Something like that. Needed a fresh start, steady paycheck. I straightened my uniform. My ex-husband told everyone I was having a mental breakdown. Were you? No. For the first time, I was finally thinking clearly. Emerson's smile was softer than I'd ever seen it. Clarity's dangerous. Gets you in trouble. Like right now, I admitted, suddenly aware of how much I'd revealed. How inappropriately close I was standing to an inmate's cell. Your secret's safe with me, Officer Howard. Miranda, I said impulsively. My name's Miranda. The next morning, I submitted another transfer request, this time directly to Warden Stevens. She called me into her office that afternoon, my paperwork already in her shredder. Officer Howard, she said, removing her reading glasses. We're short-staffed across all shifts. I need my best people where they are most effective. But you have a connection with the inmates in Block C. They respect you. She fixed me with her penetrating stare. Unless there's something specific making you uncomfortable? An image of Emerson flashed through my mind. Her green eyes, the way she'd looked at me when I'd shared my truth. No, Warden, I lied. Nothing specific. Emergency furlough approved for inmate Young, Warden Stevens announced, sliding the paperwork across her desk. 48 hours, starting tomorrow. I stared at the forms. And you want me to escort her? You're the only officer she hasn't had disciplinary issues with, Stevens replied, though her expression suggested she had theories about why. Her grandmother died. Funerals in Oklahoma City. Standard procedure. You'll remain with the prisoner at all times. My pulse quickened. 2 days alone with Emerson, away from prison walls, away from watchful eyes. Yes, ma'am, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I'll make the necessary arrangements. Later, when I informed Emerson about the furlough, she simply nodded. No smirk, no clever remark. Grief had stripped away her defenses, leaving something raw underneath. We left early the next morning in an unmarked department sedan. Emerson wore civilian clothes, jeans and a simple black sweater, but the handcuffs binding her wrists ruined the illusion of normalcy. I can remove those, I said once we cleared Tulsa city limits. No one's around to report me. She extended her hands without comment. The absence of her usual banter unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. The funeral was brief, sparsely attended. I stood at the back of the chapel while Emerson sat alone in the front pew. Her shoulders shook silently during the eulogy. When it ended, she disappeared into a bathroom for 10 minutes, emerging with reddened eyes but composed. She raised me, she explained on the drive to our motel, after my parents died. Taught me everything. How to drive, how to balance a checkbook. A bitter laugh. Ironic, considering what I went to prison for. The fraud you didn't commit, I said quietly. She glanced at me, surprised I remembered. Yeah, that. We checked into the motel, a budget chain along the highway, under dark clouds that promised rain. 2 beds, 1 room. Department policy wouldn't authorize separate accommodations. I'll take the one by the window, Emerson said, the first normal-sounding sentence she'd uttered all day. The storm broke while we ate takeout burgers on our respective beds. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rattling the cheap frames. We should head back tonight, I said, checking my watch. If we leave now. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Or maybe not, Emerson said, the ghost of her old smile returning. We were 20 minutes into the return journey the next evening when disaster struck. The rain had finally eased to a drizzle, but the roads glistened with standing water. Visibility was poor as we navigated the highway. I never saw the car that swerved into our lane. Just sudden headlights, Emerson's shout, and the sickening crunch of metal as I wrenched the wheel. We spun, tires hydroplaning across wet asphalt before the car shuddered to a stop against the guardrail. The other vehicle had already disappeared into the darkness. "Are you okay?" I gasped, heart hammering. Emerson nodded, though her hand clutched her forehead where it had struck the dashboard. A trickle of blood ran between her fingers. "The car," she said, looking through the windshield at steam rising from our crumpled hood. 20 minutes later, we trudged back to the same motel, soaking wet from the renewed downpour. The department tow truck wouldn't arrive until morning. I'd called it in, explained the situation to a disapproving Warden Stevens. "You're bleeding," I said once we were inside the room. The door locked behind us. "It's nothing." She winced as she touched the cut. I rummaged through my bag for the travel first aid kit. "Sit down. Let me look at it." She obeyed, perching on the edge of the bed. I knelt before her, gently pushing wet hair from her forehead. The cut wasn't deep, but head wounds always bled dramatically. "This might sting," I warned, dabbing antiseptic on a cotton ball. She didn't flinch as I cleaned the wound, her eyes fixed on mine. I was suddenly acutely aware of our proximity. My fingers in her hair, her breath warm on my wrist. "Miranda," she said softly. My hand stilled. In all our encounters, she'd never used my first name. "We could have died tonight," she continued, voice barely above a whisper. "But we didn't." "No," she agreed. "We didn't." Her hand rose slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. When I didn't, her fingers traced my jawline, feather light. I knew I should stop her, knew exactly how many regulations I was violating. Instead, I leaned forward until our foreheads touched, her skin warm against mine. "This is a terrible idea," I whispered. "The worst," she agreed, and then her lips found mine. The drive back to Tulsa Women's Correctional Facility was silent. Emerson stared out the passenger window, watching raindrops trace jagged paths down the glass. I kept both hands firmly on the wheel, knuckles white. What happened in that motel room hung between us like smoke, visible only when the light hit it just right, but filling every breath we took. "We can't talk about this," I finally said as the prison loomed into view. "Ever." "I know," she replied softly. Then, almost to herself, "But I won't regret it." The moment we passed through the gates, reality crashed back. Guards with suspicious eyes, inmates with nothing to do but observe and gossip. Emerson's civilian clothes were exchanged for her standard-issue gray uniform. The cut on her forehead drew questions I deflected with rehearsed answers about the car accident. Over the next week, I maintained professional distance, walked past her cell without lingering, supervised recreation periods from across the yard, but I couldn't stop my eyes from finding her in crowded rooms. Couldn't control the way my pulse quickened when she entered a space. She respected the boundaries I'd erected, never approaching me directly, but sometimes I'd catch her watching me with those green eyes that now knew exactly what I looked like when I surrendered to desire. "Officer Howard." Zachary's voice startled me from my thoughts during dinner break. "You all right? You've been stirring that coffee for 5 minutes." I forced a smile. "Just tired. Been picking up extra shifts." He nodded, though his expression remained doubtful. "Listen, the guys are talking." My stomach clenched. "About?" "You and Young." He lowered his voice. "Nothing specific, just, they've noticed how you avoid her now, after requesting to keep her on your shift rotation." "That was the warden's decision, not mine," I said automatically. "Right." He hesitated. "Look, I like you, you're a good officer, but whatever's going on, or not going on, you need to shut it down. This place feeds on rumors." I nodded stiffly. "Nothing to shut down. But thanks for the heads up." That night, doing rounds, I allowed myself one moment of weakness. I paused outside cell 307, finding Emerson alone, writing in a notebook. "Everything okay in here?" I asked, my official tone brittle even to my own ears. She looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, Officer Howard. Everything's fine." I should have moved on. Instead, I whispered, "I can't stop thinking about what happened." Her eyes softened briefly before she glanced pointedly at the security camera in the corridor. "Neither can I." 2 days later, Warden Stevens summoned me to her office. The tightness in her expression sent ice through my veins. Take a seat, Officer Howard. I remained standing. Is there a problem, ma'am? We've received an anonymous complaint. She held up a single sheet of paper, alleging inappropriate contact between you and an inmate during the recent funeral furlough. My face betrayed nothing, thanks to years of police training. That's absurd. Is it? She studied me. Because the department vehicle's dashcam shows you removing inmate Young's restraints outside facility grounds. That alone is grounds for suspension. Relief washed through me. They didn't know about the motel room, just the handcuffs. I judged the restraints unnecessary given the circumstances, I said. The prisoner was in mourning, no flight risk. I made a judgment call. A poor one. The warden's voice was steel. But perhaps not a terminal one for your career. That depends on what else I find when I dig deeper. I swallowed. There's nothing to find. Internal affairs will determine that. She fixed me with her penetrating gaze. In the meantime, you have a decision to make. Either transfer to administrative duties, away from all inmate contact, or take unpaid leave until the investigation concludes. For how long? Undetermined. I thought of my apartment rent, the bills that wouldn't stop just because my paycheck did. Then I thought of seeing Emerson every day, maintaining this painful distance. I'll take the leave, I said, surprising myself. The warden nodded, unsurprised. Effective immediately. Badge and equipment stay here. That evening, I watched myself as if from a distance as I packed a few personal items from my locker. Word had spread quickly. The sideways glances from colleagues told me everything about how I'd be remembered here. As I walked toward the exit, Zachary fell into step beside me. Just so you know, he said quietly, that complaint came from Officer Reynolds. He had the cell next to yours at the motel that night. Walls were thin, apparently. My blood ran cold. I don't know what you're talking about. He raised his hands. Hey, none of my business. Just thought you deserved to know who threw you under the bus. I pushed through the exit doors into the cool evening air, feeling the weight of the prison recede with each step toward the parking lot. Only then did I allow myself to think about Emerson, alone in her cell, not knowing why I'd suddenly disappeared. My apartment felt like a cell now, ironic considering I'd escaped one. 3 weeks into my unpaid leave, I'd developed a routine of restlessness, morning runs along the Arkansas River, afternoons applying for jobs I didn't want, evenings staring at the ceiling fan spinning endless circles above my bed. Today marked 1 month since I'd last seen Emerson. I wondered if she knew why I'd disappeared, or if she thought I'd abandoned her without explanation. The thought gnawed at me more than the dwindling balance in my checking account. The knock at my door was unexpected. Even more surprising was finding Kylie Ross on my doorstep, clutching a bottle of wine and wearing an expression that suggested she'd rehearsed whatever she planned to say. You look like shit, she announced, pushing past me into the apartment. Kylie and I had gone through police academy together before our paths diverged, me to corrections, her to juvenile probation work. We'd kept in loose touch over the years, meeting occasionally for drinks or concerts. Thanks for the assessment, I said, closing the door. To what do I owe the pleasure? She was already rummaging through my kitchen drawers for a corkscrew. Heard through the grapevine you're on leave? Scandal involving an inmate? She raised an eyebrow. Very unlike the Miranda Howard I know. I sank onto my couch. How much have you heard? Enough. She handed me a glass of Cabernet. So, what's she like? Who? The woman worth throwing away your career for. She sat beside me, expression softening. Must be someone special. I stared into my wine, debating how much to reveal. Kylie and I had never been close enough for deep confidences. But right now, she was the only person in my life who wasn't connected to the prison. Her name is Emerson, I said finally. Kylie nodded encouragingly, and suddenly the dam broke. I told her everything. How we met, the yoga class, our conversations, the funeral furlough, even the motel room, though I kept those details vague. She's just different, I finished lamely, smart, complicated. I've never felt so seen by anyone. And now? Now she's in solitary confinement because of me, and I'm sitting here wondering if I've ruined both our lives over a kiss. Kylie took a contemplative sip. Was it worth it? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on consequences, on regret, I hadn't allowed myself to consider worth. Yes, I admitted. God help me, yes. She smiled. Then stop beating yourself up. Figure out what you want and go after it. It's not that simple. It never is. She leaned forward. But here's what I know. Life's too damn short to let other people's rules dictate who you can love. After she left, I sat alone with her words echoing in my head. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to imagine a future. Not one where I magically got my job back, but one where Emerson and I could start fresh somewhere. Together. With renewed energy, I retrieved a notebook from my desk drawer. I hesitated only briefly before starting to write. Emerson. And I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if I'll ever be brave enough to send it. But I need to put these words somewhere before they burn a hole through me. I didn't leave by choice. They put me on leave because someone hurt us at the motel. I couldn't say goodbye, couldn't explain. I've thought about you every day since... And I dream about your hands, your voice, the way you looked at me like you could see straight through to parts of myself even I didn't recognize. Page after page filled with words I'd been holding back, memories from our night together, hopes, fears, questions about her life before prison. I wrote about wanting to feel her skin against mine without fear of discovery, about waking beside her without having to count the hours until I had to return her to a cell. When I finally put down my pen, dawn was breaking. I had written things I'd never said aloud to anyone, desires so intimate I blushed reading them back, letters I would never send, but somehow needed to exist. I sealed each one in its own envelope, writing only her name on the front, then tucked them into my bedside drawer, a shrine to possibility. To the woman who had somehow become the center of a life I no longer recognized as my own. That afternoon, my phone rang. The screen displayed Tulsa WCF, sending my heart into my throat. Howard, I answered, trying to sound casual. Miranda. Warden Stevens' voice was uncharacteristically gentle. There's been a development in Young's case. I thought you should hear it from me first. I gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles went white. Warden Stevens' tone made my stomach drop. Was Emerson hurt? Transferred? Had they found evidence of something worse than what they already knew? What kind of development? I managed to ask. Michael Donovan was arrested in Nevada 3 days ago. Securities fraud, wire fraud, same MO as the case that put Young away. The name hit me like a physical blow. Michael, the ex-boyfriend who had framed her. FBI's been building a case against him for months, Stevens continued. They found evidence that exonerates Young. Emails, recordings proving Donovan acted alone, and manipulated company records to implicate her. My legs gave out. I sank onto the edge of my bed, mind racing. So she's innocent. Her attorney filed for immediate release pending formal exoneration. Judge granted it this morning. A pause. She's being processed out as we speak. Free. Emerson was walking free while I sat in my apartment surrounded by unsent letters. Thank you for telling me, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Howard, Stevens' voice stopped me before I could hang up. The investigation into your conduct stands. This doesn't change that. I understand. But for what it's worth, she added, I believe you were right about her. I sat motionless after the call ended, emotions colliding like storm fronts. Joy for Emerson's freedom. Anguish that I couldn't be there to see her walk out those doors. Fear about what came next. Hours passed as I imagined her first moments of freedom. First real coffee in nearly 2 years. First sunset without bars casting shadows. I wondered if she had family waiting, friends to welcome her back to the world. Somewhere to go that wasn't a cell measured in footsteps. Night fell. I paced my apartment, fighting the urge to drive past the prison, knowing it would only bring pain to see her gone. Instead, I opened a bottle of wine and toasted her freedom alone. The next morning, bleary-eyed from too much wine and too little sleep, I forced myself out for my usual run. Physical exhaustion seemed the only way to quiet my mind. 2 miles in, my phone rang, an unknown number. I answered breathlessly. Hello? Silence then, Miranda? Her voice. I stopped dead on the jogging trail, other runners swerving around me. Emerson, I whispered. How did you... Zachary, she explained. He slipped me your number yesterday, said I might need it. I made a mental note to thank him somehow. Are you okay? Where are you? I'm at a motel near the prison. They gave me gate money, some clothes. She paused. It's strange being out. Everything's loud, too many choices. I can imagine, I said, though I couldn't, not really. I looked for you, she admitted. When they processed me out, thought maybe. She trailed off. I wanted to be there, I said, throat tight. They put me on leave. Someone reported us after the motel. I know. They questioned me too. Her voice hardened. I denied everything. An awkward silence stretched between us, filled with everything unsaid. What are your plans? I finally asked. Haven't thought that far ahead. Find an apartment, I guess. Look for work. She laughed without humor. Though who hires ex-cons with fraud convictions? You were exonerated, I reminded her. The world has a long memory for scandal, short memory for corrections. She was right, of course. Even cleared of all charges, the stain would linger. What about you? She asked. Still a corrections officer? Suspended, pending investigation. Probably won't go back. I surprised myself with the admission. Another silence, this one contemplative rather than awkward. I should let you go, she said finally. Just wanted to hear your voice. Make sure you were okay. Emerson, wait, I blurted, suddenly desperate to keep her on the line. Can I see you? Maybe for coffee or something? Is that a good idea? Her tone was guarded. You're still under investigation. I don't care. The words came out fiercer than I intended. What are they going to do? Fire me twice? She laughed, a real laugh this time. I'm staying at the Bluebird Motel, room 118. I'll be there in an hour, I promised. But when I arrived, heart pounding, room 118 was empty. The manager confirmed what I already knew. Emerson Young had checked out 30 minutes earlier, leaving no forwarding address. 6 months passed like slow-motion torture. I'd settled into a new life, new apartment closer to downtown Tulsa, new job as a security consultant for a tech firm, new hair too. I'd cut my blonde waves into a shorter style that felt like shedding skin. Everything was different, except the hollow space inside me that Emerson had occupied. I'd looked for her. Discreetly at first, social media searches, drive-bys past her former company address, then less discreetly, calling mutual connections from the prison, even hiring a private investigator who came up empty. Emerson Young had vanished. Either she'd left Tulsa altogether, or she'd become a ghost within it. By month 4, I forced myself to stop searching. By month 6, I almost convinced myself I'd moved on. Then came Tuesday morning. I'd developed new routines to replace my old prison schedule, early morning yoga at a downtown studio being the most unexpected. I wasn't good at it, but something about the discipline, the mindfulness, reminded me of watching Emerson that day in prison, of the perfect lines of her body in warrior pose. The memory kept me coming back, week after week. I was rolling out my mat when the door chimed. I didn't look up immediately, focused on finding space in the crowded studio. There's room here, I called to the newcomer, gesturing to the empty spot beside me. Thanks. One word. That's all it took for my heart to stop, then restart at double speed. I looked up slowly, afraid I'd imagined that voice. But there she stood, Emerson Young, black hair now streaked with subtle highlights, wearing fitted leggings and a loose tank top. She looked different, healthier, stronger, more vibrant than prison walls had allowed. But those green eyes were unmistakable. Neither of us spoke as she unrolled her mat beside mine. The instructor called the class to begin, and we moved through the poses in silence, hyper-aware of each other's presence. For 60 minutes, we existed in parallel, breathing in sync, stealing glances in the mirror. My body went through the motions automatically while my mind raced with questions. When class ended, I half expected her to disappear again. Instead, she toweled off her face and turned to me. There's a coffee shop next door, she said, as if we'd parted ways yesterday instead of half a year ago. If you're interested. 10 minutes later, we sat across from each other, steaming mugs between us like a fragile border. I studied her openly, the new definition in her shoulders, the confidence in her posture that had nothing to do with defiance now. You look good, I said finally. Freedom agrees with me. She smiled, stirring her coffee. You changed your hair. I touched it self-consciously. Needed something different. Silence settled again, heavy with unasked questions. Why did you leave? I finally blurted. That day at the motel. You asked me to come, then disappeared. She looked down at her hands. I got scared. Thought I might be just prison infatuation for you. Something forbidden that would lose its appeal once I wasn't behind bars. That's not what you were. I know that now. She met my eyes. But then, I'd just spent 2 years having every choice taken from me. I needed to make one for myself, even if it was the wrong one. I nodded, understanding despite the hurt. Where did you go? Oklahoma City first, stayed with a cousin. Then got a small place here in Tulsa about 3 months ago. She paused. I looked you up, found out you left corrections. Wasn't much choice after the investigation. I'm sorry. Don't be, I said honestly. Best thing that ever happened to me, getting out of there. We talked for hours, about her new job at a nonprofit helping former inmates reintegrate, about my consulting work, about everything except what hung between us, the night in that motel room, the feelings that had survived 6 months of silence. When our cups sat empty and the baristas began wiping tables, I finally found courage. I tried to forget you, I admitted. Couldn't do it. She reached across the table, fingers brushing mine. The contact sent electricity through my arm. I never wanted to be forgotten, she said softly. We walked to my car together, stopping beside it in the fading afternoon light. Without the barriers of prisoner and guard, we were just 2 women standing too close, breath mingling in the cool air. My apartment's not far, I said, voice barely above a whisper. Her answer was to step closer, eliminating the last space between us. When her lips met mine, it felt like coming home after a long journey, familiar and new all at once. Later, lying tangled in my sheets, her head resting against my bare shoulder, I traced idle patterns on her skin and marveled at the absence of fear. No cameras watching, no regulations broken, just us, learning each other in the soft glow of my bedside lamp. What are you thinking? She murmured against my collarbone. That I've been holding my breath for 6 months, I replied, and I've only just remembered how to breathe. The seasons changed, and so did we. A new year arrived, bringing with it possibilities neither of us had dared imagine during those prison days. Emerson's work with the reintegration program flourished. She had a natural talent for connecting with women who'd walked the same path. My consulting business expanded, letting me set my own hours and build a life that finally felt like mine. We moved in together that spring. A small apartment with oversized windows overlooking the Arkansas River. Mornings began with coffee on the balcony, Emerson's head on my shoulder as we watched the water flow past. Evenings ended with tangled limbs and whispered confessions in the dark. Do you ever think about it? She asked one night as we lay in bed, the fan spinning lazily overhead. The prison. How we met. Sometimes, I admitted. But it feels like another lifetime, another me. She nodded against my chest. I got a call from Zachary yesterday. He's being promoted to sergeant. Good for him. I meant it. Without his small acts of kindness, slipping Emerson my number, warning me about the complaint, we might never have found our way back to each other. He invited us to his wedding, next month at the Botanical Gardens. My hand, which had been stroking her arm, stilled. Both of us? Together? That's what surprised me too. She propped herself up on one elbow to look at me. He said it's time people got over themselves. The wedding was elegant but modest. White flowers, string quartet, afternoon reception under a tent. Zachary beamed beside his bride, a kindergarten teacher with a laugh that carried across the garden. We almost didn't go. Right up until that morning, I'd considered calling with some excuse. It wasn't that I was ashamed of Emerson, never that, but facing my former colleagues, the whispers, the judgment. The thought made my stomach knot. We can still back out, Emerson offered as we parked at the gardens, reading my anxiety. I looked at her. This woman who'd survived false accusations, imprisonment, and emerged stronger. If she could face the world without flinching, so could I. No, I said, taking her hand. I'm done hiding. The stares were immediate as we entered the reception area. Former coworkers did double takes, conversations halting mid-sentence. Warden Stevens was there too, her iron gray hair styled for the occasion. She nodded to us from across the room, not friendly exactly, but acknowledging. Drink? I asked Emerson, needing momentary escape. Please, something strong. At the bar, I was cornered by Reynolds, the officer who'd reported us. He'd aged in the year since I'd seen him, lines deeper around his mouth. Howard, he said stiffly. Didn't expect to see you here. Zachary invited us. I emphasized the plural, daring him to comment. He glanced over my shoulder to where Emerson stood near the gift table. So it's true then. You two are together, I finished for him. Yes. He shook his head. Was it worth it? Throwing away your career? The question echoed Kylie's from that night in my apartment, but with none of her warmth or understanding. Still, my answer remained unchanged. Every day, I replied, taking the drinks from the bartender and walking away without looking back. The drive home was quiet, both of us processing the mix of acceptance and judgment we'd encountered. Some former colleagues had been welcoming. Others had treated us like carriers of a contagious disease. We should move, Emerson said suddenly as we pulled into our parking space. My heart sank. Because of tonight? Don't let them chase us away. No. She took my hand. Because I found a lakeside cottage for sale, outside city limits, private, perfect for us. I stared at her, this woman who continually surprised me. You want to buy a house? Together? I want a fresh start, she said. Somewhere that's just ours. No history, no prison shadows. 1 year to the day after Emerson's release, we moved into the cottage. It needed work, peeling paint, creaky floors, a deck that sagged in one corner. But standing on that deck with her as sunset painted the lake gold, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Freedom. Not just from prison walls or others' expectations, but from the barriers I'd built within myself. We made it, Emerson whispered, arms around my waist, chin resting on my shoulder. We had, past judgment, past doubt, past the odds that said relationships born in such circumstances were doomed to fail. Yes, I agreed, turning to kiss her under an open sky. We're finally free,